Hello there. I just posted a video about the reason why I decided to buy five of those Chinese J20s. And we talked about the deal, and I'm gonna pay it personally, in quotes, with the system that I got running. And it's gonna be something on the order of 94 million euros per aircraft, so it's gonna be pretty cheap. And we get a single factory line to make more if we need. And it's for 5 copies, and the whole trade is worth 94 per copy, and nothing for the factory itself, which we'll have to build. And we can only have one line, so it's possible that we can make more if we need. And it is pretty extraordinarily good in its front profile. It gets through a lot of stuff pretty easily and shows you some things you may want to see. Its air profile, the radar profile in the front is unbelievable because, as you can see, it's completely round for the most part. And look at the size of the front fire cone or the front radar cone, if you will. It's designed to go at a wider angle of attack towards the enemy, while the F-35 is designed to go at a very straight angle towards the attack. So it's optimized exactly towards the front and the back, while the J20 is optimized to be detectable in the back when it's running away because it has a better engine than the F-35 because it's bigger. But it's like wings are pretty wide, but even then it's not as wide as the F-35's wings, which are 10 square meters in detection space, what it looks like on radar. This Chinese thing is an air superiority fighter. This US thing is an air all-around fighter. It's not a superiority fighter. It's designed to fly over a radar site, for example. That's why its radar cross-section in the back is also thin. It's designed to strike radar stealthily without destroying the radar sites underneath it into the opponent's territory without being detected by the radar, if it's properly coded, if you will. It'll locate your radar sites and fly between them while being undetectable in the front and the back. But this Chinese model is very specifically an air superiority aircraft. It is designed to destroy only other air targets. It has very limited capability to do shit beyond that. And the US hasn't designed an air superiority fighter because it wanted to maintain the air superiority doctrine tree while building the air superiority, air bomber capability. So it made bombers with air superiority fighter characteristics that were still designed to be bombers. While doing this, it maintained its ability to design fighter aircraft, but lacked in its ability to design bomber aircraft, which you can see as many of its, even the largest stealth bomber projects not being completed anywhere near where they thought they'd have even domestic market, let alone being able to sell bombers formally in large quantities compared to like something like Boeing, you know what I mean? They don't have the equivalent in civilian sector. So they designed a bomber with fighter characteristics and kept that doctrine for 30 years. Now they have to design very quickly and show that with their inferior GDP and higher military allocation, they can actually build more stuff than the Chinese for a very long time because the Chinese have a relatively small military budget per capita. So the Chinese would have to large increase their budget and not within the scope of catching the US within 20 years in military spending, but perhaps on the paper. And that is why, for now, if the US looks at China and says that they're going to build 500 J20s in 2025, and the US has to design a fighter air superiority craft, they'll get it running by 2025 at the latest. But if they crash build it with their standard strategy and go to maybe 1,800, the Chinese will have built 500, 500, and 500, of which they may have even sold another 500. So at that rate, the US will do more because military gear can't really be built at a large cost or at large in the environment without decreasing consequently economic growth. The US has decided to maintain, at least since the 70s and the Reagan administration, a very strong military, which has driven down their economic growth, for which they are now paying for lacking colonies, for example. You know, the Chinese couldn't get to space comfortably, at least until the 2050s. Why the fuck didn't you build space colonies? At least. But for that, you'd have to blame the older generations. All, all arguments about them being financially incapable are bullshit. They made some kind of generational decision to abandon space, some kind of biological entity-wide thing. They picked a random objective and said that they're gonna outrun the Soviets there, and they did, and then said, haha, space, and then put it the minimum. If the Soviets hadn't launched Sputnik, the US wouldn't have launched their first space program in the 1970s. That's how uninterested the West is in space. It's not an ideological Soviet is better statement, it's that you suck at space. The space, for the first 300 years since arriving there, it's going to be a huge hassle with very limited payoff. Then at some point after your planet stops feeding the colonies, at some point after your planet stops feeding the colonies and the colonies terraform their planet and become self-sufficient, they're going to turn around with their expertise of their planet and say, we can terraform your planet to your biosphere. We know how to terraform a planet into a biosphere. Yours is not yours. And then we're going to have a discussion. What would they say is the optimum? And that I really want to hear. So, long story short, 5 J20s added to our Air Force is not enough to take on our entire Air Force. So it's not like an unbelievable craft, but on one against the F-22s or F-35, it outperforms. Its better radar profile gives it a better advantage over the civilian community. The F-25 has a bulky radar application system. The Chinese craft loses very strictly in a cost-to-cost competition with our model of Air Force, which is very good. But it adds, when added, certain functions to our Air Force, which I believe over the long term will make our cost-to-cost Air Force ratio once again better. But that will take much time, but it will be added nonetheless. It will initially decrease it, so that's why we're announcing it as a reform. It will make us momentarily weaker, so hold on if you're holding on to us. And the idea is to have one of a single best modified largest Western air superiority design. That is the YF-22. It's designed specifically to be an air superiority craft, and it's the model for that one. It is good. If you just put that particular craft through a redesigner, just perhaps do something with the metals and so on and so forth, you will have an unfucking believable air superiority fighter. Your fighters will, after they have like 5 minutes adjusting to how it runs, because it's gonna run like a Russian, they're gonna have a time. That I can tell you. They're gonna have a time. Now that being said, it kinda sorta looks like it's gonna be a big selling item, I think, based on specifically the fact that its front radar envelope, where it's safe, where it is small, where you cannot see the craft, is wider than the US version, and it is designed to go scanning in a block against US fighter in a neutral airspace where neither has radar coverage, and go quicker than the US craft. So having the same radar, it's going to fly around in a circle or similar for perhaps one spiral and see if it can actually detect anything in any of its front paths. Then it flies straight while its back is exposed because the radar profile for the back is very poor, and scan the front section by doing little turns and making a twisting shape or so forth in its preferred method. And because it's faster than the US version will be outflown in such a grid by the fact that even if it's after it, it cannot catch it by accident without the without the Chinese version catching it first. Because if it's flying at maximum speed and the Chinese version is flying at maximum speed, the US version will never catch up, meaning that the Chinese will, in one-to-one air combat without radar coverage for each, which is pretty much the standard in imagination or immune system land, win. So they have designed a superior air superiority aircraft than the F-22, 25 or 35, but not, in my test's opinion, better than the 22, which is 25 years old. So, judging by that, their mass-produced rate and 3D was so good. It was very cheap. If it were expensive, I wouldn't do it. It was very cheap. We even got the factories for ourselves. And it was so nice that I ordered 5 of them. We're now going to run some tests on how many we want to produce. And it doesn't really change the main air competition in any way because we're still going to need bulk 5th generation from somebody. And nobody is really interested in doing the bulk Chinese thing at the moment. But we will add enough of them. We will also add you in the competition for the bulk, I think, but nobody will mention it. There is, however, a thingy about it. Going for the Chinese option in current European geopolitics will be difficult. It will be exceedingly difficult. But perhaps 5. It is interesting in that a cost air combat, or in terms of cost, the J20 as well as everything except a very bulky F-series fighter or a very bulky Soviet, very high-end fighter loses to a 3rd generation, which is Cessna with modern air combat capabilities, Cloud specifically. The Cloud is such an efficient opponent to such a craft that it's unbelievable. With modern distributed radar and flying in a cloud of 30 of them with somebody doing spirals, they will be seen, they will be shot at, but by the time you have seen and shot at them, they will also roughly have an idea of you and all turn towards you. And through the fact that they're now pretty sure in the direction where you're at, they will probably spot you. One will fire at you and light you up, and the rest will fire at you afterwards. And then the cloud is destroyed for the cost of perhaps 500 million. And of your 200 million a pop, F-35s or so, will at least 5 be destroyed. Another 15 will be some degree of damaged. I am pretty sure. Let me put this in a social context. You have 1 billion to spend on professional weapons only, like anything you want, and not only, professional weapons. And you know that in some point in the next 20 years, you will be attacked by everyone in the region for a while. And it will be bad for you. And the attacker number also gets to spend 1 billion, but instead of spending it only on military gear, preparing for such an eventuality as Euroforce will, such a group will spend it on economic growth for 19 years. And once you freak out about it not happening, they start suddenly spending in their military. That is the metaphor for the air combat situation. So, my recommendation, the US purchases or builds, I would hesitate perhaps as the US to purchase directly from China in terms of military gear, but they do have an export model which I would recommend that you purchase for comparison and build in a crash speed a couple of them to test on a similar model and just make an air superiority fighter of your own and then start a modification campaign for the YF-22. You're gonna have 3 or 4 main options for what to do in the air combat. And given that you actually spent in your military and you're not building up from shit, you will have a lot of prepared military assembly capability and not in as much a field army. Now, the Chinese are now investing in military and they will be pretty powerful in 10, 20 years, but everybody knows you'd kick their ass. We only need to look at the nuke numbers, so don't get uppity. So that's kind of the thing. We all know who is who based on the nuke numbers and that is very sad but true. Navigational reasons and no more of that. So I will be going to play Hearts of Iron. I will be making a podcast about it, and that is as much as I care to say about this topic. We got them for 94 million euros a pop, which is kind of low for 5th generation. And we got to build one factory line for them, meaning we need to have every unit in specific different main design phases of construction. So we can perhaps build 5 at a time if it's very fast, but one has to be in hull, one has to be in engine, one has to be in electronics and so on. That's a factory line. And I believe, based on the nature of the treaty, outward confirmation through these devices would be not in my interest. So this is as far as I need to go. I would recommend air superiority fighter. So I'm gonna build this next to Hearts of Iron, and I'm gonna make my new in German European Union game air superiority fighter's name. By that I jump into the modern age. We'll see. Bye.